Here we go. This is the fun talk. Not that the other ones weren't fun, but... So this talk that I'm getting ready to give normally takes an hour and a half, so I'm going to have to fly through some of it here. I've talked for too long already. But this is called The True Nature of Politics. This is a talk. I work at Young Americans for Liberty, like I said earlier, as a full-time political activist. And this is a talk that we give during pretty much everything that we do. Teaching people how politics actually operates. It works. People say, oh, the system's broken, it doesn't work. No, it works. It just maybe doesn't work the way you think it works. But we know that it works because we use it and we work it all the time. So before I get into that, though, one last thing I want to say before I start this last talk is I just wanted to thank Michael and the elders at CTK for giving me this opportunity to share with you guys. There's lots of guys they could have had teach this content, and they blessed me with the opportunity to be able to share with you guys today. And so I really, really appreciate Michael and the elders at CTK. And I love that they have this King's Domain thing going on because, you know, this idea of discipling men and families is one of the things that drew me to CTK. And so, and then also, thank you guys for coming. It's been such a blessing to spend the morning hanging out with you guys. So let's talk about the true nature of politics, how politics actually operates. Now, in order for us to understand how politics operates, the first thing we need is to understand what politics is. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to break down the word phonetically. Okay, it comes from the Latin, poly, meaning many, ticks, blood-sucking parasites. Now, how many of you guys agree with that definition of politics? If you've been involved much, it sort of follows in that line, doesn't it? What is politics? Well, first let's talk about what politics is not. Politics is not looking after the common good. Politics is not looking after your fellow man. Politics is not even serving our Lord and Savior. Now, that last one is a motive. It's my motive, and I hope it's your motive too, but it's not what politics is. It's not definitionally what politics is. So what is politics? Politics is the adjudication of power. It's determining who rules whom. It's not the art of compromise, it's the art of confrontation. You probably have heard, politics is the art of compromise, and that's why we keep losing, because we keep compromising. But from the outside, when it comes to grassroots mobilization, for us, we say, politics is the art of confrontation. We are there to have conversations with those in power saying, this is what the people that elected you want, and we're not going to rest until we get it. Now, outside of America, or outside of the West, I'll say, although some Western countries are going more in this direction, this is what politics in the world looks like today. They determine who rules whom at the point of a gun or the edge of a machete. But thankfully, politics in America, United States politics, can you grab my clicker out of the front pouch there? It's driving me crazy hitting this button over and over again. The blessing of American politics, our founders built a system wherein we can resolve our conflicts with one another peaceably. Next pouch, I'm sorry. I told you wrong. Our system allows us for the peaceful settlement of issues. It's a brilliant system of checks and balances, and power is diffused at various levels. The reason this slide is important, it ties into some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. Yes, excellent. It ties into some of the stuff I was talking about earlier because our founders were brilliant men. Were they flawed? Yes, but they were brilliant. And they were drawing fundamentally on not just a Christian worldview, but on three primary things that they drew from. Number one was William Blackstone's commentary on common law. Blackstone was a Christian who wrote broadly about English common law. So they drew on the English common law system, which is rooted in the scripture and rooted in a Christian worldview. The second was the Bible itself. And the third was the writings of the writings of the Puritans. In particular, Rex Lex, written by Samuel Rutherford. But other Puritans, you know the Puritans wrote a lot about politics. You wouldn't know it reading some of the Puritan paperbacks that we have today because a lot of that stuff is cut out. But when you read the original content, the Puritans wrote at length about politics. Now, the founders were influenced by secular thinkers as well, but they were heavily influenced by the Bible. They quoted broadly from the Bible in their writings, and they were heavily influenced by Blackstone and also by the Puritan work ethic and the Puritan view of civil government. So, because of that, you'll see a lot of what I just talked about in these slides as we talk about how government operates. Power is diffused at various levels. They built a system of government in which there's competition. Competition between sources of power, the state, federal, and executive and legislative branch. Not excessively corrupt. Let me go back to this point really quick. There's competition in the government. And this ties in with what I was going to talk about. Most people know that there's competition between the branches of government, right? So you kind of, that's, if you understand that, you understand a little bit about government, right? There's competition between the judiciary and the executive and the legislative branches of government. If you understand also that our founders created the government to also have competition for power between the state and the federal levels of government, that's understanding it even better. They wanted competition for power between the state and the federal government because they knew that your rights would be protected if those two entities fought for power. But there's a deeper layer even than that. It's not just the branches of government. It's not just the state versus the federal or even the local versus the federal. Our founders created a system in government in which there's a competition for power between the people and the government. You have power. I have power. We have moral agency in the society in which we live because our nation was founded by Christian people who believed on the basis of the law and word of God that the people, in addition to the government, should have power and moral agency when it comes to their civil government. Not only that, it's not excessively corrupt. Now, key word there is excessively. Is there corruption that sneaks in sometimes? Sure. Was there corruption in the 2020 election? I'll let you decide. But you know what happened then? In 2024, what happened? It got fixed. That corruption was exposed to the light of day. It's not excessively corrupt. This is important for conservatives to take note of this one. You got to stop running around saying things like, elections don't matter. Yes, they do matter. And you running around saying elections don't matter is what causes conservatives not to show up and vote. So shut up and stop it. Of course elections matter. There is some corruption, but it's not excessively corrupt. So if the system works and politics is the adjudication of power, what is power? Real political power is forcing politicians to act the way that you want or replacing them. Take a picture of that slide. That's what political power is. How political power, how much or how do politicians do what we want? So if political power is getting politicians to do what we want, how do we get the politicians to do what we want them to do? And what do we want them to do? Votes that they take? We want them to take hard votes. We want them to carry legislation. We want them to sponsor good liberty legislation, conservative legislation. We want them to sponsor the bill. So here we're talking about legislators. Do they sponsor your bill? Do they refuse to use excuses? Are they willing to force a roll call vote? Right? All of these things. We want legislators, one of the things we want to force them to do is we want to force them to force roll call votes so that we can force legislators to go on the record. We want them to go on the record. They want to stay off the record. They don't want you to know what they think, and we want you to know what they think so that come election time, they can't say, I'm pro-life. We say, okay, prove it with this vote. I'm pro-gun. Okay, prove it with this vote. We also want them to be professional bill killers. We want politicians, good politicians, to kill bad bills. And a lot of times that causes them not to be very popular with leadership, right, Jay? If leadership wants that bill to get across the finish line and you load it up with crazy amendments so that it dies, they don't like you very much. We do, though, right? We want politicians, we want our champions to be professional bill killers. These are things they do for us. So I love this graphic here. The Kentucky, how many guys are from Kentucky? How many of you are from Ohio? Good, okay. I do a bit of work in both states. It's about half and half. The Kentucky legislature, the Ohio legislature, full of lawmakers that will vote right if we force them to. In fact, they'll even tell you. They'll say, I agree with you about that bill to abolish abortion. I'm pro-life. And if it ever comes up for a vote, I'll vote for it. Let me translate legislator speak to normal person speak for you. What they really just said to you is, if you twist my arm, I'll vote for it. But in the meantime, I'm going to do everything I can to keep it from coming up for a vote. Right? The legislatures, these are full of conservative legislators that will vote right if we force them to. We're talking about good legislators. We're not just talking about people that vote right. We want them to sponsor good bills. We want them to kill bad bills. And most of all, we want them to force roll call votes to put people on the record. Now, what power is not, power ain't, I'm in Kentucky, I can say ain't. Power ain't, what it ain't is it ain't access. Power's not access. And you got to do not confuse having access with power. You get involved in politics, one of the things politicians love to give you is access, because access will make you go away, right? So this power access is like when the legislator says to you, here's my card, it's got my personal cell phone number on it, right? I just got a personal phone call from the congressman. I got a personal phone call from my state representative. He knows my name. Great. The governor wants to meet with me. It's almost never the governor, actually, by the way. Usually it's his staff. We're winning because they're finally listening to us. Are they? Well, they're meeting with us. That's access. Politicians will give you access all day long if you're willing to take that. And stop there. You know who this lady is. Access is being listened to. Access is having a seat at the table. Access is having your calls returned. Access is never being perceived as a threat. This is access. This is what you look like. This is the pro-life movement in a nutshell in America. Please, please, Mr. Legislator, give me some scraps from your table. Please regulate the number of paper towels that have to be in the paper towel dispenser at the abortion clinic where they're killing babies. Please regulate the width of the hallways. Right? Please, please give me scraps from the table. That's why we lose. We're playing the access game. Begging for crumbs. I don't want you to look like this. Christians have been looking like this for too long. I want you to look like this. This is what we're going for. If I'm not gnawing on your leg, that's a good day for you if you're a legislator in one of the states I work in. If I'm not filling your inbox with petitions and filling your voicemail box with phone calls from angry constituents about how you're doing some wicked, evil thing, that's a good day for you, right? Unless you are, take a picture of this slide and write this down. Unless you are politically feared, you will not be politically respected. I'll say that again. Unless you are politically feared, you will not be politically respected. So, would you rather be feared and respected or loved and manipulated? Those are the only options. And the unfortunate reality is that far too often, Christians want this one. They want to be loved and manipulated. One of the reasons that we lose so badly in the culture war is because Christians care more about being liked than they care about doing what's right. We got to stop it. My friend Rusty Thomas calls it being nicer than Jesus. Stop trying to be nicer than Jesus when you're involved in politics. Demand that which is demanded. Demand that which God demands. Demand that which is true and good and right, and be feared and respected rather than being loved and manipulated. I'll just let that one sit there for a second. This is Lindsey Graham, the preeminent example of a spineless rhino, right? All right, there's two paths to power. Lindsey Graham, well, I'll explain the picture of Lindsey Graham in a minute. There's two paths to power. One path is the direct path. This is the path chosen by dictators and despots. These are the people that have their hands directly on the lever of power. And we need some people on the direct path. These are elected officials. These are, Jay Williams was in here a minute ago. He's on the direct path to power. He's a state senator, and we're grateful for him. Oh, there he is. Yep, he's a state senator. We're grateful for him. And then, remind me what your name is again? Campbell is running for, she's running for state representative here in Kentucky. She's going on the direct path to power. We need a few people on the direct path to power, but not many. We need a few good people on direct path to power. But generally speaking, when people think they want to get involved in politics, they think about running for office. But there's also another path to power. Most activists stop when they start thinking about running for office, but there's another way. It's not as glamorous. It's less understood. It's much more powerful, though. And this is called the indirect path to power. On the indirect path to power, what we're trying to do is control the environment of those on the direct path to power. And if we can control their environment, we can control them. We're trying to be an agent of conflict on the outside. And you know these people. You've seen these people at work in our society. These people are people like the unions, the radical environmentalists, and it could be you, right? We've seen union thugs force their will on legislatures and governors. We've seen radical environmentalists. We've seen radical LGBTQ people with their radical agenda impose their view on the legislatures, even though there's just a few of them, right? They're change agents from the outside. But if you could get organized and learn to do just a few things, it could be you on the outside direct path, or the outside path to power, pushing politicians to do the right thing. There's two theories of power. One is education, and the other is mobilization. Let's talk about education first. All right, so first, there's two ways that people want to do education. The first is education of politicians. If we could just get them to understand, they will support us. That's the education of politicians. We got to go down to the Capitol. We got to spend the day down at the Capitol handing out pocket constitutions. And if they just would read the Constitution, they'd do the right thing. Because no politician's ever read the Constitution before, least of which Barack Obama, a constitutional scholar. Did knowing the Constitution cause him to do the right thing? Ask yourself that question. He knew the Constitution backwards and frontwards. He just didn't care what it said. We have to educate the politicians, or we have to educate the people. If we can get enough people behind us, they'll have to pass it, right? All right, so let's talk about trying to educate politicians first. This is your education politician starter pack. Your pocket constitution and stress reduction kit. Notice the directions. Place on a firm surface. Follow direction and circle of kit. Repeat step 2 as necessary or until unconscious. If unconscious, cease stress reduction activity. This is your, have you ever seen one of those pictures of a guy talking to a wall? That's what it's like trying to talk to most politicians, right? We got to teach them about the Constitution. We got to educate the politicians. That's how we get them to, that's how we win. Probably not. Probably not. Because most politicians, it's not that they're not doing the right thing because they don't know better. It's that they're not doing the right thing because they care about something else more than they care about doing the right thing. The problem is a condition of the heart, not the head, generally speaking. Or we could try to educate the voters. So let's talk about that. How many of you guys have liberals in your family? Staunch liberal family members. Okay, Thanksgiving's coming, right? You got staunch liberal family members. Have you ever tried to have a political conversation with your crazy liberal aunt, right? Or your crazy uncle, or maybe it's one of your parents, right? And how did that go for you? How many of your family members have you converted from being a liberal or a do-nothing person to being a staunch liberty activist? Maybe a few here and there. How many guys have really converted somebody in your family from being a liberal to a conservative? Yeah, that's what I thought. That's about right. Yeah. And if you can't convince your own family members, what makes you think that you can convince a stranger? These are people that love you. They care about you. They've known you your whole life. If you can't educate them into believing and doing the right thing, what makes you think you're going to be able to educate the general public? But let's say we did. Let's say we're going to write a letter. We're going to write a letter to convince the people the right thing. And we're going to send it to all the voters in Kentucky. We're going to send it to everybody in Kentucky. So how many people would that be? I don't know. Let's say 1 million. Is that how many people live in Kentucky? Anybody know? Not very many. I know that. What's that? 4 million total people. There you go. And we're going to send a letter to all 4 million of them, right? So we're going to get every discount known to man on postage. But how much is that going to cost us? That's going to cost us a pretty penny. Who are we going to send to? We'll send it to all households, all right? The average people respond. If you get 1% response in your direct mail, you're winning. You're a champion. 1% of the people respond to your direct mail. What do most people do when they get direct mail? I mean, we still use it because it moves the needle politically. But is that going to be the thing that changes the hearts and minds of the culture? Well, okay, fine. Direct mail is not the way. Nobody reads the mail anymore. I'm starting a blog. Okay, fine. There's nothing wrong with having a blog. I have a blog. I think a blog is a good thing to have. But just understand, you're not moving the needle politically with your blog. You're not doing political activism when you do that. You're on the education path, right? I'm going to start a podcast. Podcasts are great. I have a podcast. You're not moving the needle politically with your podcast. Why? Because the education theory is attractive, but when it comes, we're talking about politics here. When it comes to moving the needle politically, education is inefficient, and sometimes it can be soft and safe. Look, the things that I have to do to be effective in politics are not exciting things that you do Facebook Live videos about. Like, yesterday, I spent 6 hours building a spreadsheet. Nobody does a Facebook Live video about that. Like, hey, everybody, making a big stand for liberty here. Just finished another spreadsheet. But that's the kind of stuff you have to do if you want to be effective in politics. It's grueling work, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with the education path. Having a podcast, having a blog, all of those things are fine. Just understand you're not moving the needle politically fundamentally by doing those things. And why is that? Well, because let's talk about public opinion and right to work. People say, I'm writing my blog, I'm doing my podcast because I want to change public opinion. All right, well, let's talk about public opinion. 80% of citizens support voluntary union membership. That is, if you work somewhere, you can't force somebody to be part of a union if they don't want to be part of a union. That's right to work, right? You don't have to be part of a union to get or keep a job. That's right to work. 80% of people support that. Most workers in this country live under the threat of forced union dues, though. In other words, 80% of the people don't believe you should be able to be forced to be part of a union to get a job, and yet in most states, you can be forced to be part of a union to get a job. What's happening there? Can we educate our way out of this one? 80% of the people already agree with us. Public policy doesn't make public opinion. You need to get this idea in your mind. It's very important. This is something Christians have failed to understand for a long time. Public policy does not make, or public opinion does not make public policy. Okay? When homosexuality, gay marriage became legal in the United States of America, the overwhelming majority of the populace disagreed with it. And yet, it still became legal. Right? Public policy does not make public opinion. Obamacare was extremely unpopular, yet it passed. Bank bailouts, car industry bailouts, extremely unpopular, and yet they've happened repeatedly. Taxes, what if we had a vote to get rid of taxes? How do you think that'd go? Probably pretty well, right? Everybody hates taxes, yet taxes continue to increase. Public policy doesn't make, or public opinion doesn't make public policy. But that's also a good thing for us, because you know what else is popular? Gun grabs. Studies repeatedly show that the majority of Americans believe that assault weapon bans are a good thing. Whatever an assault weapon is, if you figure it out, let me know. There doesn't seem to be a definition of it out there anywhere. Gun grabs, redistribution, because that's how inconsistent we are as a society. The majority of people don't like taxes, but they do like wealth redistribution. But it's because we're not thinking consistently. Green policies. Now, this is becoming less popular. We need to update these slides probably. Minimum wage. Oh, we should raise the minimum wage to $18 an hour. Wouldn't that fix all of our problems? Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. I mean it. You can get, yeah, I'll just leave that. All right. Pop quiz. Who said this? American people aren't ready for pro-life legislation. Who said that? Anybody know? George Bush. George Bush was supposed to be the most pro-life president in the history of the United States of America. How many guys were there to witness that? I mean, he ran on a pro-life platform. He got what was left of the religious right behind him, and he was going to be the guy, the pro-life guy. So he finally gets elected to office in his first term, and one of the first things he does, he has a big event at the Capitol. And he invites all the leaders of all these pro-life groups, and there's a big rally at the Capitol, big pro-life rally. And the most pro-life president in the history of the United States of America gets up and gives a talk to the pro-life movement. And you know what he says? You haven't done enough work yet for us to pass pro-life legislation. You got to go back home and you got to change the hearts and minds of people before we can pass pro-life legislation in the United States of America. That is the most powerful man in the world saying we can't pass pro-life legislation right now. Right? Why is that? We'll come back to this in a minute. Why is that? This is what happens. This is what happens when you're on the education path to power. Or when you're on the education path. Do you think that Bush didn't know he could accomplish a lot of good things for the preborn as President of the United States of America? Of course he knew. He was playing the game that politicians play. And what is that game? Do as little as humanly possible while looking like doing something at the same time. That's where the education path gets you. So how do we win in politics? What do we need to win? Well, I don't know, this may be too religious a crowd to understand this reference, but I won't take a show of hands, but I'm sure some of you have seen this movie. It's a numbers game. How do we win in politics? Politics at its core is a numbers game. Politics is revenge of the nerds, right? I always tell people, if you want to be successful in politics, you have a better shot as an engineer than as a poli-sci major. Because politics is pulleys and levers. It's understanding, put pressure here, and it causes this result. It's a numbers game. How many people do we actually have to influence or impact if we want to be effective in politics? So let's say this. This is our universe. Okay, so let's say this is a legislative district in Kentucky. It's a state rep district in Kentucky. All right, so this is the whole district. This 100% represents everybody that lives in the district. How much of this 100% do I have to get if I want to win an election in that district? What do you think? 50%? Who said 50%? Okay, Jay's playing the game with me. I need 50% plus one if I want to win, but I don't really, do I? Yeah, the one is you, that's right. Do I need 50% of the people that live in this district to vote for me if I want to win 50% plus one? No, because only 60% are eligible to vote. Who's not eligible? You can. Kids, minors. Who else? Not registered. We'll come back to not registered in a minute. Illegals. Not just illegals. Anybody who's not a citizen, any non-citizen is not allowed to vote. Felons are not allowed to vote, right? And there's one more that I feel like I have to add every time I do this. Used to not have to add this one, but more and more you got to include this. So dead people are also not allowed to vote. Right? 60% of the people are not eligible, including the people in the graveyard. All right? But we can file it down even more than that, can't we? 40%, only 40%, and that's not 40% of the people who live in the district. That's 40% of the 60%. 40% of the 60% that can vote, only 40% of them are registered. Okay, so fair enough. Do I need 20% of the people plus one to live in the district? Or can we file this down even more, you think? Anybody? Yeah. Only 24% actually show up to vote. And that's good turnout. That's like President Trump's on the ballot 2024. That's when you get 24% turnout. And it's not 24% of all the people in the district. It's 24% of the people that are registered to vote. All right, great. So do I need 12% plus one, or can we file this down even more? We can file it down more, can't we? Because 8% of the people are going to vote D no matter what, and 8% are going to vote R no matter what. There was a man in Indiana running for state representative who got put in prison for distributing child pornography and won his election. Now, why is that? He was a Democrat, of course. But why is that? How did that happen? Well, the way that it happened is not because the Democrats are so evil that they're okay with the child porn addict being elected. It's because so many people in that district go into the voting booth and pull the D lever. They're not even paying attention to who's on the ballot, right? 8% are going to vote D, 8% are going to vote R. So what that means is right here in the middle, 6% are what we call in play. Sorry, brother, this is going to offend you, but the 2% at the bottom are going to do something stupid like vote third party, right? Because in the United States of America right now, you cannot win an election if you're not a Republican or a Democrat. With the exception of some small local, you can in some local seats. But, so what do I need if I want to win? 3% plus one. 3% of the people that live in this district are who I need to communicate to and get on my side. 6% is what we call in play. Those are the people that are deciding still who they're going to vote for. I need 3% plus one of those people to come to my side in order to get them to win. Guess what? That's a lot less than 50% plus one, isn't it? And that's exciting news because 3% plus one is doable. You might say, okay, well, that's great, R's and D's and all that. But like in my district, like your district, for example, probably, who's going to be the next state representative isn't decided during the general election. It's pretty much decided during the primary, right? All right, it's a heavy red district. So what about that? Most districts are like that. So what about GOP primary? Same thing. In the GOP, there are two wings to the party. There's the Rhino wing and the Liberty wing. And usually the math works out about the same. There's about 8% are going to be in the Rhino wing, 8% are going to be in the Liberty wing, and 6% are in play. So that 6%, those are the people that you have to message to get on your side. So in a lot of districts, like in West Virginia, for example, where we're running state representative races, a lot of times it's like 2,000 total people that show up to vote in that election. That's not very many, guys. And you need half of that to win the primary. 1,000 people. You need to get 1,000 people to vote for you to be a state representative. I don't know what it is in Kentucky. I think it's a little more than that. I think it's maybe 4,000 people that show up in the average state representative primary. So you need 2,000. 2,000? Is that right? 3? So you need 1,500, right? You need 1,500. That's not that many people to move in order to win. And you know what this means, too. It's not just winning an election. That means every elected official in Kentucky knows that they need 1,500 people to keep their seat, and you just need to find somebody that can get 1,500 people to vote against them in order to take their seat. So guess what that means? Every time they start getting text messages and phone calls and emails from constituents, they're thinking about that 3% plus one. It doesn't take very many people to move the needle politically. That's the thing I want you to come away from this knowing. It's 3% plus one, and 3% plus one is very doable. It's a small sliver of people that make the difference in American politics. What you have to do is find and mobilize the 3% plus one that already agree with you. That's how you win in politics. Just 3% plus one. All right, so let's talk about electoral variables. There are some things that create variety in elections. For example, voter turnout. We got a primary getting ready to come up in May in Ohio, and I think it's May in Kentucky as well, right? Yeah. So there's not going to be as many people voting this time as last time. But why? Well, because Donald Trump's not on the ballot, right? That's an electoral variable. Voter turnout. Partisan mood of the electorate. In 2008, you couldn't get a vote if you were a Republican. The partisan mood had shifted Democrat, and Barack Obama was preaching his hope and change message. People were sick to death of George W. Bush and all of his wars, and the partisan mood had shifted to the left. It was a hard time. I mean, Barack Obama in what was it, 2012? Barack Obama took Indiana, for goodness sakes. The partisan mood had shifted. The Republican Party had lost the confidence of the people. It was hard to win. Candidate. Some people just do or don't like a specific candidate. Or single issue philosophy. Some people, who's the pro-life guy? That's who I'm voting for. Who's the pro-gun guy? That's who I'm voting for. Who's the pro-abortion person? That's who I'm voting for. Like some people, it's just a single issue thing, right? Voter registration. Run, don't walk away from someone who thinks that you should hold voter registration drives. I'll say that again. Run, don't walk away from people who think that the way to win in politics is to hold voter registration drives. Why? They're not registered because they don't care. If they register, they won't vote because they don't care. If they do register, you do get them to register and they show up to vote. Will they vote for your candidate? You don't know because they don't care. That's the reason they're not registered to begin with. There can be exceptions to that, though. Candidates or issues can come along that convert don't cares into cares. There are don't care into care converters, and there are care into don't care converters. Okay, let me give you some examples. Recent examples. This guy. You think this guy was a care into don't care or a don't care into care converter? He turned cares into don't cares. The most amazingly boring person in the history of United States politics, right? And a liberal to boot. He turned don't cares into cares, or cares into don't cares, right? But there are candidates and issues that come along that convert don't cares into cares. Here's some recent examples of that. Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. He did not win the presidential primary, but he got hundreds of thousands of people involved in politics that had never been involved in politics before. And he sparked what we call the Liberty Revolution, which found its way into the Tea Party and now is in the Liberty wing of the Republican Party. Guys like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, right? Here's another example. Bernie Sanders. Doesn't matter if you like him or not. The point is he got lots of college students involved in politics that never cared about politics before. Barack Obama in 2008 with his hope and change message. Lots of people showed up for the first time to vote for Barack Obama. And then there's this guy. How many people do you just know yourself who never got involved in politics before that voted for Donald Trump? Lots. How many do you know that were blue dog Democrats, voted Democrat their whole life and chose to vote for Donald Trump? Right? This guy, he's actually probably the most recent massive example of a care into don't care, or don't care into care converter, and he did it again in 2024. Right? So these are electoral variables. All right, let's talk about the nature of politicians. How do we get politicians to do what we want them to do? Politicians are usually nice, and they don't like confrontation. They get along with people, and they're apt to compromise. Right? They want people, politicians generally speaking, they want people to like them. They're likable people, and they want people to like them. Most have an ideological position, but they're swayed when they believe they can lose an election, right? So the average politician, their ambition rules them, right? They're dominated by ambition. They've sold their soul to their ambition. We joke around, and it is just a joke, but like politicians, like a true politician, not a statesman, not one of our people, but like a politician, is hardly even a person anymore. They've sold their soul to their ambition. They're like Gollum, right? And political power is their precious, right? You remember what happened to Gollum when you read Lord of the Rings, right? He was a hobbit, but he sold his soul for the ring, and you saw what it turned him into. That's what happens to politicians. That's why we call it the swamp. It literally destroys the soul of people. They're dominated by their ambition. They either want to get elected, re-elected, and then they want to run for higher office. And everything that they do is about that. They might be pro-life, but if being too pro-life would keep them from getting reelected, they're not going to stand on that principle. If being too pro-life would keep them from getting elected to higher office, they're not going to stand on that principle because they're driven by their ambition. And this, let's see, well, that's a joke. Politicians are, okay, they're driven by their ambition. And this is the reason that politicians are constantly pulled to the middle. Rare leaders pull against by standing on principle, forcing votes at the Capitol. So there are examples, I'll give you some examples of people that stand on principle on the right and the left and pull the middle. One example would be AOC. She does it on the left. Now, she's not particularly intelligent, right? And I don't agree with any of her policy positions, but she is a principled leftist. And the moderate Democrats, which a moderate Democrat is still pretty left compared to the historical Democrat position, but even now, moderate Democrats don't like her. Why? Because she's a liberal and she stands on leftist ideological principle. And then on the other side is Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie is principled, right? That's one of the reasons that Donald Trump tried to recruit somebody to run against him. Why? Because he will not violate his principles. He stands on principle, period, and he will not do anything that runs contrary to his principles, right? There are a few that do that. Generally speaking, if a person doesn't stand on principle, they get sucked to the mushy middle, because the mushy middle, that's where you get elected to higher office and get more political fun things and so on and so forth. They're constantly pulled to the middle. This is a quote from Ted Harvey, who was a state senator in Colorado. He said, "I've never seen one elected moderate become more conservative or more liberal, but I have seen countless liberals and conservatives enter the House and become more moderate." We call it the swamp. It's this spiritual thing that people are constantly in pursuit of their ambition, and their ambition drives them to the mushy middle so that they can gain more political power. This is good news. I said this on Michael's podcast the other day. This is good news. Everybody gives me a funny look when I said that. The fact that politicians are driven by their ambition is good news for us, because that tells us that politics is understandable because politicians are understandable. And if we understand the way politicians operate and what they want, that helps us win. Politics is predictable because politicians are predictable. You can control politics because you can control politicians. You control their environment and you control them. They're ruled by their ambition, and if you control their environment, you control their ambition. Excuse me. Politicians and candidates are a byproduct of their environment and the condition that you can create. Think about a rhino you'd love to retire. Just put him in your mind right now. All right, think about him. Now, how big is your list in that district? How many people do you know in that district? How much money have you raised to impact politics in that district? How many people have you developed? In order to do the work that's necessary to win? These are the questions you need to start asking yourself in politics if you want to be able to be successful. How do we stop the pull to the middle? You stop the pull to the middle through force. Force comes, that's basic science, right? Things are generally going in a direction. The only way you can stop them from going in that direction is using force. Force comes in two flavors, pleasure and pain. All right, so for the next few minutes here, we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation about what politicians like. What do politicians like? Politicians like good press and public praise. They like being the center of attention. They like endorsements. They want you to attack their opponent. They like not having challengers in their election, especially primary challengers. They might expect that the other party, if you're a Republican, you might expect that a Democrat would have somebody run against you, but you think you have a divine right to the seat from your own party. So they have a primary challenger. They hate that. They love volunteers. They love manipulating the rules in their own favor, and they love money for their campaign in their district. All right, that's what politicians like. Very uncomfortable for me. I don't like the positive side of this coin. Let's talk about something more fun. Pain. What brings pain to a politician? Bad press and public embarrassment. Politicians hate having their name in the press negatively. Being ignored. Politicians hate to be ignored because they're divas. That's how they became politicians, right? They want to be in the limelight, and they hate being ignored. They hate denouncements. They hate challengers, especially primary challengers. I talked about that already. They hate political party opposition. They hate lack of money and volunteers. I've worked on campaigns where there's not very much money or volunteers. Very difficult. The biggest thing they hate, mobilized angry voters. There is one tactic that is proven to move politicians over and over and over again, and it's this: tangible evidence of large amounts of angry voters. That will get politicians to do what you want them to do. So, how do politicians avoid pain? They don't want to be pressured into doing the right thing, so how do they avoid pain? They avoid pain by doing as little as possible. They avoid pain by claiming action when they really did nothing. This is a favorite move of politicians, because doing stuff makes people angry, and not doing stuff makes people angry. So what politicians do is they try as much as they can to appear to be doing something while actually doing nothing. This is a favorite tactic of politicians. So they'll do things like claiming to act when they didn't act, like passing a resolution with no teeth. We passed a resolution. I signed on to the pro-life resolution that says we as a legislature believe that life begins at conception. Who cares? What difference does it make that you said you believe life begins at conception? You didn't do anything. Babies are still being murdered, right? We support the Second Amendment. Meanwhile, we're trying to pass red flag laws at the same time, right? Trying to appear to do something while doing nothing. Create a task force. This is a favorite. You can be part of my Christian task force, the conscience of my campaign. That's access, by the way, being listened to, right? Summer study committees. This is a favorite. We're going to do a summer study committee on it. Nothing ever comes out of summer study committees. Host a public hearing about your issue. Make vague public statements at a town hall. This is a favorite of politicians. I'm pro-life. I said I was pro-life. I support the Second Amendment. I just gave a whole speech about the Second Amendment. Didn't you listen to what I said in my speech? Yeah, but what about your vote against the Second Amendment? Right? What matters is not what you say. What matters is what you do. So what's the greatest force in politics? The Council on Foreign Relations. No, that's a joke. What's the greatest force in politics? Inertia. Right? The to-do list is nothing. The greatest force in politics is inertia. So how can we can use inertia to our favor by becoming professional bill killers, train others to become professional bill killers. Inertia powers us on defense. Because let's say they're trying to pass a bad bill. Inertia is the status quo. If we're playing defense, we're on the side of the status quo, so it makes it easier for us to win. It's hard to win in politics when you're on offense, so sometimes we can use inertia in our favor, but it does make offensive action more difficult. The system is designed to move slowly or not at all. And by the way, that's a feature, not a bug. Our founders designed our political system to move slowly and be difficult. It's supposed to be hard to pass laws because it should be hard to get anything passed that you can use the force of government to force people to or not to do. It's supposed to be difficult. I wish they'd stop shutting the government down, blah, blah, blah. No, shut it down. Shut it all down. Leave it shut down. Let them fight. It's supposed to be difficult. Can't we all just get along? No, we don't want them to get along. We want everything to be exceedingly difficult to pass so that it goes through a long, rigorous process of examination before it gets through. And inertia helps us with that. So our job is to force them. This is where I get to the meat of this. I'm almost done. What is our job? This is what we want to do. This is our big priority, okay? What do we want to do if we want to win in politics? First thing we want to do is we want to force politicians to go on the record with roll call votes. It's not enough to say you believe this or that or the other. We as the grassroots on the outside should be working on the outside to force the legislature to go on the record with a vote. Don't tell me that you believe in school choice in Ohio when you could schedule a vote to override the governor's school choice veto right now and you haven't done it. I want to vote. I don't want to hear you tell me your opinion. I want to vote. I want you to go on the record. I want you to vote to override the veto. I don't care what you say. I care what you do. Force them to sponsor real bills with real teeth. Demand immediate action. These are things we have to do as the grassroots on the outside. Now, we got to stop being conservatives, especially Christians, are the most easily appeased block of people in politics. We have to stop being so easily appeased if we want to win in politics. Politicians must know that there are consequences for bad political behavior. And then we must mobilize the 3% plus one in order to move them out of office if they're not willing to do the right thing. Embrace the fact that politics is a numbers game. Politics is a numbers game. You have to be able to, and by the way, the whole reason I became a pastor was so I wouldn't have to do math. And now here I am in politics having to do math all the time because politics is a numbers game. We need to know who's with us and who's against us. Are there enough people with us that we can force the politician to do the right thing here? That's why things like raw milk don't make great political issues. I mean, I believe anybody should be able to drink raw milk if they want, but there's just not enough people with that issue to move the needle politically. The extremes define the middle. This is very important. Christians always want to run to the middle too. Oh, let's just compromise. Let's just get what we can get. You're going to get a lot less if you don't stand on principle. If you're here, right? You're standing on the right? I demand school choice. The money should follow the kid. And parents should be able to decide where their kids go to school, period. No backstops, no ifs, ands, or buts. If the money goes to home educating the child, that's the decision of the parents. And then, of course, the teachers' union's all the way over here. They don't think parents have any rights when it comes to educating their kid. They think parents are dumb, and we just need public school teachers. I don't know if I'm out of the frame here or not. They think parents are dumb, and that teachers should be able to make all the decisions, right? And that the teachers' union and the Board of Education, that's who really ought to raise children. Most of the time, what you're going to get done is somewhere in between here. But if you're over here, and then you just keep doing this, where's the middle now? The middle is this is what conservatives do. That's why the conservatism of today is the liberalism of 30 years ago. What we have got to do is get back over here and hold the line here. No, abortion is murder, and it ought to be treated like murder. No, the government established the Second Amendment in order that the people could have a backstop against tyranny, and the Second Amendment must be recognized and protected. Period. No, taxation is theft, especially property taxes. We don't want them just to be. We don't want them just to be cut. We want them to be abolished. Right? This is where we stand, because the extremes define the middle. We went through this with vaccine mandates in West Virginia. We were calling for completely eliminating all vaccine mandates in West Virginia. And not everybody, most people agreed with us, or a lot of the people involved in the fight agreed with us about that principally, but they wanted to say, we're over here, abolish vaccine mandates. It's not the job of the state to tell you to make your health decisions. That's the job of the family. There were a lot of people that were involved that were with us principally, but they would say, well, we just want a religious liberty exemption. Okay, that's abolish vaccine mandates. Here's your religious liberty exemption. Those people over there want the government to make your health care decision. Where's the middle now? The middle's over here. If I want to get this, I got to hold the line over here. I don't actually want that. I want this. But you're not going to even get that if you go there and compromise. This is very important for Christians to get, why I'm spending so much time on it. The extremes define the middle, and we have got to hold the line on principle. That's how we win. And we just keep coming back, demanding what's righteous over and over and over again, and don't stop until we get what we want. The political class. All right, write this down. If a member of the political class tells you how to behave or how politics work, there's a question you should ask yourself. And that question is this: If I believe them and do what they say, how does it benefit them? Get that question in your mind. Learn to ask that question. I learned this when I was I'm the middle of three, and my older brother had some crazy ideas, but he didn't want to be the test dummy a lot, and so he would come up with crazy ideas, and he'd be like, "Hey, jump out that window and see what happens," you know. And me being 5 or 6 years old, you know, I jump out the window. Okay, now I have a twisted ankle, and he knows. Okay, don't do that. And I was about 11 or 12 years old when I started learning to ask the question, why don't you do it? I started learning, if he's telling me to do this, I need to ask myself, if I do it, what's in it for him? Right? We got to do that with government. That's not the way things work down here. If I believe them, what's in it for them? I go away. Right? Generally speaking, politicians are looking out for their own better interests. Right? So we got to keep that in mind when we're interacting with them. How do politicians react to political pressure? Politicians want you to go away. That's what they want. And they want you to go away for nothing. And if you won't, they want to give you as little as possible. How little can I give you, Michael, to get you to go away? Stop telling people to call my office. Stop sending me petitions. What's the price? How little can I give you? And you'll go away. Or they'll make you think that they concede it when they actually didn't. So these are things politicians will do when you're good at political activism. The first thing they'll do is ignore you. And as long as they possibly can, they'll just ignore you. But then when you get pretty good at it and you start actually bringing the pressure, then they're going to try to sound reasonable. Hey, listen, I agree with you, but I have to appear to be reasonable. I got to get reelected. I got to be down here with these people. Of course, I think vaccine mandates ought to be abolished and parents should make those decisions, but we must be reasonable, right? They'll try to sound reasonable. They'll whine and threaten you. This is my favorite, right? Oh, that mean old Derin, right? Scott Heckert from West Virginia did a big announcement about me on the day we were having the vaccine fight, telling everybody how mean I was, sending text messages to his district. I was like, you just voted no on parents having the right to make their children's medical decisions. I'm about to get a lot meaner. And what I mean when I say meaner, just for the sake of the FBI agents that are watching this video, what I mean when I say meaner is not any sort of physical violence. What I mean is I'm going to mobilize the grassroots even harder in your district now because you did the wrong thing. Right? So they'll whine and threaten you. They'll have other people threaten you. This is a favorite. They'll send some other pro-vaccine freedom group or some other pro-life group, some establishment pro-life group to threaten you. Right? Hey, they're not going to listen to you anymore. It's like, oh yeah, because they listen to you? That's a separate discussion. They'll buy you if you're really good at it. But I've been offered many jobs in politics. Hey, why don't you come, you're good at this. Why don't you come join my staff? Because you're a rotten scoundrel, that's why. I would never dream of it. I would rather live in a cardboard box, right? But they'll try to buy you. And then eventually, if you play your cards right and you stay consistent and you don't give up, they may vote your way. No matter how they try to oppose you, always rejoice and double down. When they ignore you, double down. When they try to sound reasonable, double down. When they threaten you, double down. When they have others threaten you, double down. No matter what happens, keep doubling down. Don't stop doubling down until you get what you're demanding. Because what you're demanding is right. I'll run through these real quick. How politicians react to pressure. I'm with you, but you don't understand. I've got to appear reasonable. Governor won't sign it. Courts will kill it. The political reality is, I hear all these all the time, you'll get something worse if you keep pushing. Like, they're already killing babies, dude. Like, you're the only one talking about this. You haven't done your homework. That's a favorite. You don't understand how things work down here. Well, they're about to work different. Credibility. This is what politicians will threaten you with. That's not how we do things here. Bargaining. Do that again, and I'll vote against your issue. Great, then I'll tell your voters how you voted. Legal attack. I'll get you investigated. I'll have you looked into by so-and-so. And by the way, you better make sure your ducks are in a row because they actually will. You're only hurting your own cause. I'll tell your board that you're ineffective. That's why one of the reasons I actually ended up at church at CTK. I had to go to church somewhere where nobody could tattle on the elders to me for doing the right thing, right? It's very important. So what's your price? What are you willing to take to give up and sell out your principles? For me, it's a vote on my bill. You can threaten me with anything else that you want. You can try to take anything from me. I don't care. I'm in this to do what's right, and I am not going to compromise. Period. The only thing you can give me that will make me go away is passing my bill. That's what will make me go away. Until I want something else, and then I'll come back again. If you want a friend in politics, get a dog. Write that down. Personal relationships with the political class are dangerous and usually end in disaster. I do have a few politicians that I'm friends with, but as a general rule, it's not a good idea to make friends with politicians because you're going to have to hold them accountable eventually. And the ones that I am friends with, like the ones that I'm really good friends with, they will tell you if you talk to them about me, oh yeah, Derin's my friend, but I know if I go off the rails, he will rake me over the coals. And I'm going to do it. I tell him, I will rake you. If you compromise and you abandon your principles, I will be the first one in line to rake you over the coals. And I will do it because I love you. You said you were going to stand on principle, and I am going to hold you accountable. That's what the grassroots is supposed to do. All right. What if you trade your power for access? Then it's game over. Ask this question. Why are politicians being so nice to me? They're getting political intelligence. Be careful what you say to politicians. They're trying to get political intelligence from you, or they're trying to sway you and schmooze you. This is why politicians are the way that they are. They're trying to convert you to access. Now look at this verse in the Bible. Proverbs 23, 1 through 3. When you sit and dine with a ruler, note well what is before you and put a knife to your throat if you are given to gluttony. Do not crave his delicacies, for his food is deceptive. Now, this verse is very interesting. The chapters and verse divisions were added later. But here, with this verse, it's interesting. If you go back to the last verse of Proverbs chapter 22 and read what it says, as a matter of fact, I'll just read it to you real quick here rather than trying to say it from memory. Go back to Proverbs 22. It ties directly in. Proverbs 22, verse 29. Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. And then 23:1 says, when you sit down and dine with a ruler, understand what is well before you. So you should put a knife to your throat if you are a man of appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for his bread is falsehood. You see a man who's skilled in his labor, he's good at what he does, he will stand before kings. And he says, when you stand before kings, don't allow yourself to be spun into compromise by them. Because their delicacies, if you're a glutton, their delicacies, that will spin you. Right? They're trying to convert you to access. Hold fast to your principles. And then instead of being the grassroots representative to the politicians, telling them what they must do, you become the politicians' representative to the grassroots, telling us what we must settle for. How many of you have ever seen that before? It gets ugly when that happens. Very ugly. The political realities are blah, blah, blah. All right. So this lecture is the True Nature of Politics lecture. We're out of time. It's 12:06. That's the last of the talk. Now, this lecture that I just gave you, True Nature of Politics, is part of a broader series of lectures for a class that we teach called the Liberty Activist Boot Camp. That whole class is filled with tools of political activism, where we actually show you, like I'll show you, this is what my everyday life looks like. These are the tools that I use. This is how you bring more pressure on politicians and so forth. We're going to be having one of those in Ohio. We haven't picked a location yet, so if you know a location that's good, come come talk to me after this is over. It's 8 hours long. So if you're a glutton for punishment and you want to come listen to me talk for 8 whole hours, it's not a good marketing ploy. You can come listen to me talk for 8 whole hours. That's what that class is. But it is a really good lay the foundations for politics. We also have a class called the Liberty Candidate Academy for people that are interested in running for office, and we're going to be teaching those around Ohio and Kentucky as well. I want to say, as I wrap it up here, I want to say thank you to Michael and to the elders of CTK. I already said that. But, you know, there are not many pastors that will let a guy just get up and talk for 3 hours about politics. A lot of pastors are afraid of the topic of politics. They're afraid. Some of them, it's because of the 501c3 status. Some of it's because they don't want to get on the wrong side of the church ladies of both genders in their church. There's a lot of different reasons why. And so I just want to say how grateful I am to be at a church where the men are men, the pastors are men, and they understand the importance of Christians being involved in politics. And so I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope it was a blessing to you. And I really, really appreciate you guys giving me the time to be here and hanging out with me this afternoon. So did you want to do questions and answers, or got your mic? Okay, we'll take it. If you got to book it because you need to be out of here at 12, you're free to go. But we wanted to have the time for questions and answers. So does anybody have any questions that I can answer for you today? Got one already.
First, just thank you for coming. This was awesome. Thank you to this church for doing this. I have a little bit of familiarity with what kind of goes on in the pro-life world, and I feel like that there's, at least some of the stuff I've read and seen, that some of the pro-life people compromise on a ton of stuff. And I'm just curious how you view, I think I get a better picture now, but like incrementalism versus, I don't know what the other word would be, like totalism. I don't know what the word would be, but how do you view in the pro-life world victory on small things versus standing firm over here on this side when this is what we want, but we're willing to take this to try to get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Principally, I'm an immediatist. I want to abolish abortion, period, with no exceptions, no compromise. I think abortion should be, the abortion statute should be addressed under the homicide statute, not under some healthcare regulation. And so I'm an immediatist. I want abortion to be criminalized for all people, equal protection for the preborn, period. So going back to that analogy, I'm standing here. I want equal protection for the preborn, period. And you notice the more people that stand here, the more you see heartbeat bills before the road, trigger laws, and so forth. Why is that? Well, because of what I said, the extremes define the middle. So when the heartbeat bill was the extreme before the abolitionist movement, it was the 20-week ban, and partial birth abortion was the middle, right? You guys remember when those were the things we were fighting for, any guys? Then, the abolitionist movement rose up, and a lot of people in the abolitionist movement saying, no, we're not going to compromise. Abortion is murder. It needs to be treated like murder. And all of a sudden, there were these slew of pro-life victories here, right? So I am an immediatist. I want abortion to be abolished without exception or compromise. Having said that, I also recognize that God tends to work. Sanctification is progressive. That's true of an individual, and it's true of a culture. So I'm going to stand here and demand that which is right, and recognize that it's going to take the culture a little bit of time to adjust and begin to sanctify and come over here. But I'm still going to keep preaching this message. I'm going to work with politicians like in Ohio that file bills of equal protection. And now Young Americans for Liberty is not involved in that. I work with Operation Save America. Young Americans for Liberty is a libertarian. We primarily focus on liberty issues, but also I would say principally pro-life, which is I want equal protection without exception or compromise. I think the pro-life movement is prone to compromise in part because the church is prone to compromise. We want people to like us. We want peace, generally speaking. And so we are willing to take crumbs and be satisfied. We're willing to celebrate crumbs. And for me, I'm not willing to celebrate crumbs. So you pass a heartbeat bill, fine. You pass a life of conception that doesn't have criminal penalties across the board, fine. But I'm not going to celebrate it. I'm going to stand over here and demand what God demands. So that's my view. Does that answer your question? Yeah. That's my view.
You mentioned the threat of 501c3 from the IRS. Do you believe that the settlement agreement from the IRS and their statement to not prosecute any church for political statements or positions is a guise, or do you think that that will lead to more openness at churches?
That's a great question. Here's my answer to that question is, the IRS has never revoked a church's 501c3 status. That threat is a paper tiger. It has never happened in the history of the church, in the history of American civilization, but it's not even happened since the Johnson Amendment that put that statute into law. And the reason why is because churches are treated like 501c3s by the state, period. Even if you don't register as a 501c3, you're still treated like a 501c3 by the state. The state has never effectively revoked a 501c3 status because to do so would be virtually impossible. The IRS doesn't want to sue a church over violating 501c3 status because they know that if they actually went to federal court through the Supreme Court process, they would lose. So every now and then, they'll try to hang it over the heads of the church to keep the church from engaging in prophetic work with regard to politics. But the reality is the 501c3 status controversy is a paper tiger for the state and an excuse that cowardly pastors hide behind. That's what it comes down to in the end. And so no church, and having said that too, even thinking practically about what would be involved in revoking a 501c3, your church would have to actually be involved in what's called, not issue advocacy, but your church would have to actually be involved in what's called electioneering. So you'd have to actually be spending money, not just saying this candidate's good or bad, not just saying abortion must be abolished. You'd have to actually be involved in electioneering, helping get a candidate elected and so forth, like knocking doors for them out of your church, citing literature for them from your church, that sort of thing. And so the whole thing is kind of confusing, but really it's a paper tiger. Vodi Bakum, about 20 years ago, supported this thing called Pulpit Freedom Sunday, where churches were literally preaching sermons in which they were endorsing candidates from the pulpit and talking about political issues from the pulpit and sending videos of those sermons to the IRS, daring the IRS to try to revoke their 501c3 status, and the IRS never even made an effort because they knew that they wouldn't have a chance in federal court. So it should be a non-issue, if that makes sense. So great question.
Do you have any practical wisdom for a more local approach, so at like a township or even a school board level, on how to be a mobilizer but be shrewd and not, because with local there might be more local consequences than immediate, how to be shrewd and approach that at a more local level?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's always consequences. If you're going to get involved in politics, I mean, Jesus said count the cost, right? So there's always some potential consequences for blowback. It's actually tends to be less on a local level than on a state level, but not always. So the same principles apply, but they just scale down lower. So if you want to be involved in politics at the local level, you still have to mobilize the 3% plus one. And 3% at the local level is much smaller than 3% at the state level. So say you're getting involved in a county commissioner race, or you're getting involved in a city councilman race or something like that, or you're trying to lobby a councilman, 3% of the people in his district is much less than 3% of the people in a statewide district or in a state legislative district. And so it's the exact same principles that apply. They're just on a smaller scale. And I certainly very much encourage Christians to get involved in politics at the local level. You know, your county commissioner has as much impact on your life, if not more, than your governor. Your city ordinances have a regular impact on your life. I say get involved in those things, but just follow the same pattern. Don't let yourself get wrapped into access-based politics. Focus primarily on mobilizing the grassroots rather than letting yourself get sucked into, just sitting around trying to get the politicians to do what you want them to do, if that makes sense. So it's the same thing, just scaled down a little bit for local. So, anybody else? Great question. Oh, got one over here. I don't know about this guy.
I'm just setting you up for more commentary.
Okay.
All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, therefore go make disciples of all nations. Good bumper sticker, or is it actually true?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm one of those people that I believe ethne there, the nations, I think it is talking about us having impact on civil societies. And so a lot of people, there was a move in the church for 2 or 3 decades there to move away from the idea that that had anything to do with politics, but I think it has everything to do with politics. God cares about the nations, and he wants us to disciple the nations. And that means bringing the message of the gospel of redemption, of course, but there's the gospel of the lordship of Christ, and that impacts nations. And so I think what Jesus is talking about there is, yes, the church makes disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but we also do that by discipling magistrates, their duty before God, to govern in a way that brings them honor and glory and praise. And these things all connect to one another too, right? Like I talked about 1 Timothy 2. We pray for our magistrates that they may govern in a way that honors God, so that there's peace in the land, so that the gospel can go forward. These things are all interconnected with one another. This is why I wish I would have said that on Michael's podcast the other day when he asked me that question. What verse tells you to be involved in politics? Well, 1 Timothy 2, for example. Well, that just tells you to pray for your magistrates. Well, yeah, but it also paints a picture for us there of what it looks like when godly magistrates are governing in a way that honors God. It's good for the church, it's good for the gospel, and it's good for society. And that should be what we ascribe to. So I think Matthew 28, 19 and 20 speaks, and also 18, don't forget. Jesus resurrects from the dead, and what does he say? This probably impacts politics about as much, if not more, than any other verse in the Bible, which is Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So if all authority has been given to Jesus, what authority does that leave for anybody else? The word's distributed, all, right? So that means if anybody else has any other authority, it's delegated to them by Christ. And that's true of the civil magistrate as well. So they have a duty, they need to be discipled to govern in a way that honors them. So I like that question. It's a great question.
You said that, which I found interesting, you're supposed to run from voter registration. Mm-hmm. So if a very low amount of Christians are actually going out to vote, are you going back to the point of the people who should be teaching is the family, not the church? Who should be teaching and admonishing or encouraging people and telling them how to get educated about who they should be voting for? Where does that lie?
Yeah, that's a great question. So don't walk away from people that want to run voter registration drives. That's the specific, because voter registration drives are when you go out to like Kroger or a college campus somewhere and you're just registering people to vote. I would say, don't do that, because we don't know how those people are going to vote, so we don't necessarily know if we want them to or not to vote. But the broader question of telling people that they should register and vote, remember my key point there was they don't care. So the first thing we have to do when it comes to talking to people in general about registering to vote is we have to tell them to care, right? You should care. If you're a Christian in this nation, if you're a Christian in Kentucky, Fort Thomas, Kentucky, or Cincinnati, Ohio, or wherever else, you should care who your elected officials are in that city, in that county, in that town, in that state, in that country. You should care. And Christians need to register to vote because they should care. And that message, I do believe, needs to come from the pulpit, that pastors should be telling their congregants, you should care about politics that are happening around you. Now, I am also one, I have no problem with pastors endorsing candidates. Some pastors are uncomfortable with that. That's something that a pastor has to figure out what the Lord would have him to do specifically. But at the bare minimum, I do believe that pastors do need to teach the congregation, you should care about politics. And part of caring about politics is being registered and voting in an election. It's not all that, but, and then to take a step back further from that is the family. Fathers have a duty to teach their children to vote. You know, my children, we sit around and talk politics all the time. And I don't just tell them what to believe. We open up the Bible and talk about, you know, my daughter Joanna, for example, loves current events. And so she'll talk about whatever things she heard Tucker Carlson talking about that day or whatever, Candace Owens or whoever she was listening to. We'll sit down and we'll open the Bible and we'll talk about it. And then we'll talk about the political aspect of it. And so I think it's the family and the church. The idea to me that Christians would not be registered to vote and engage in the political system is unconscionable. So my friend Callie, who's a Reformed Baptist pastor, is a radical libertarian, and he believes voting is violence. All right. So if you have that view, we could debate that or whatever. But as a general principle, Christians need to care what's happening in the civil society around them, and so we should be involved in voting. And so we need to teach them to care. Pastors need to teach them to care, and then encourage them to register to vote. Is what I would say. But that's different than a voter drive, if that makes sense. Like, I know if the majority of the people at CTK Church were registered to vote, I have a pretty good idea that the overwhelming majority of them are going to vote good, right? They're going to vote for somebody that would be net positive for society versus going to a Kroger parking lot or, heaven forbid, a college campus, you know, and registering people to vote there. So thank you for that question. Appreciate that opportunity to clarify that.
One more question.
Just along those lines, one of the podcaster that we've listened to that's kind of helped shape the way we think about this is that politics matter because policies matter because people matter. Mm-hmm. And I get so annoyed when I hear people say, well, I just don't care. And I'm like, well, then you don't care about people. Because all of this stuff matters because it affects people and the way that they live. And so I don't know if that's helpful or not, but something we've thought about.
No, it is. I mean, I think that's part of which this kind of concept has gotten expanded so far that it's misused. But I would say voting is part of loving your neighbor. Seeing to it that the rights and liberties of your neighbor are protected. And it's also loving your own household. Seeing to it that the rights and liberties of your own household are protected. And so I think that, and it's part of loving the culture in which you live. A more Christian society be good for everybody. A society, before I go off on this tangent, I'll just mention it in passing here. But a lot of people think that if we had a society that was more Christian, that it would be more tyrannical because they have this idea in their mind of what they think it would look like. But if you look at the laws of God in the Bible compared to the law of today, the law of today is the litigious tyrannical law. This whole Bible is, this particular translation of the Bible is, hold on, I'm going to look here. 1,665 pages, front to back, right? Now compare that to the code, the legislative code in the United States of America, or the legislative code in the state of Ohio, or legislative code in the state of Kentucky. Because where you have people, coming back to what you and I were talking about, where you have people that don't exercise good self-government, you end up with a multiplicity of laws at the federal and state level, and you end up with tyranny. Whereas if you had a more Christian society, you would have better self-government, and you would have less laws overall, and ultimately you would have way more freedom. And that's loving your neighbor and loving your family. And I think that's part of what 1 Timothy 1 and 2, or 1 Timothy 2, 1 and 2 is getting at. So,
that's awesome. Derin, if people want more from you, if they want to get involved with what you're doing, where do they find you? How do they get connected?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook, send me a friend request. If you're going to, let me know, though, because I don't pay attention and those stack up. So if you let me know, I'll go look for it. Send me a friend request on Facebook. And then Operation Save America, check out Operation Save America on our Facebook page, our website, operationsaveamerica.org. And then Young Americans for Liberty is yaliberty.org and libertyaction.us. Those are the websites for the work that I do legislatively. And if you're interested in helping host a school, please come talk to me, because I'd love to host one in Kentucky or Ohio.
Great. Let's show some appreciation for Derin and his time with us.